I think on the city, I would say maybe Phyllis had always a kind of maybe more strong positioning in really thinking how, and that's also the mission of CCA, how to make architecture a public concern. So really to understand how the citizens can be involved in understanding the importance of architecture somehow. And so beside the kind of work she has done to kind of preserve part of the city that will be then being demolished otherwise and so on, it's more about the idea of really architecture being not just the domain of architects, but really to be shared with the citizens and so on. A guy starting to work early on in Casabella and somehow in the years of the Reconstruction, and seeing some of also of like recordings of her explaining what was her experience there, is that actually that helped her to really build a culture of architecture and the discourse about architecture and so on, that was very necessary in a moment that in a way and it kind of was not only reconstructing the city but was also giving and the country, but it was also giving a kind of new identity. There I think there might be again a connection to the work that Phyllis has done in thinking the CCA as a place of ideas, and so that is a repository of ideas somehow. And so the kind of editorial work of Guy or the conceptual work of Phyllis of putting together the CCA with this idea of repository of idea has a kind of infinite, anyway, band of knowledge for future generation to dig in and think about contemporary. I think that has a similar attitude that Guy found that in the magazine, and Phyllis found it in starting the CCA with that. I think they are both figure at the crossroads of these two things, so between modern and postmodernism. Phyllis has always been very interested in history of architecture, and I think her, also when she writes her letter to her father, in like arguing to the fact that, choosing a different architect that the father aided, she really goes back to Renaissance as the moment that she thinks is a kind of fundamental way of thinking architecture. So somehow I think even the CCA as a building his the demonstration of the collapsing of all these different her experience and her early work that she did coming back in honor to her mother, that is also an homage to a kind of myth and a kind of modern architecture, but somehow then working on the CCA with this different kind of agenda or way of thinking, and somehow also wanting to relate to the context and the local with the materiality, the greystones and so on. To me, is really there. It's our figures that are in this kind of passage. They were both trained and more maybe with a kind of modern and modernist figure around, and then it's this kind of other passage in this new context. Guy and Phyllis has navigated all these different fields, really understanding that architecture is not just about building. And I recently looked to a short interview with Guy that she were saying, I'm navigating all these different domains somehow, and I think what is interesting. I don't want to become a specialist of anything. I just think that it's important to understand all of these things because of to be an architect, you need to be aware of all these different conditions somehow, and all these different contexts, and all these kind of the forces involved. Now, I think it's also because they had to do their work in that time where maybe to being a woman who is doing the job of a man is the most courageous act, is the most brave act somehow. And that was what they maybe wanted to demonstrate, that they can be in those shoes and they can do it somehow. I think that they all operated in years where they had to work very hard to being women and being also independent women. Like they both had, like they were the agent, like were not part of a larger group. And I think the way they did it was through the idea that you should not even talk about it. Even in their appearance, I have to say, Guy really wanted to, seems like she was more a man, and you can also say the things for Phyllis, like sort of like, so to me, there is something about the fact that the way they thought that was like not in a direct way, but sort of like saying, you have to be more man than a man somehow. If you don't connect the idea of architecture just to building, then you start to see a lot of more agency of women. It's interesting also if you look again with Guy, the editorial board of Casablanca in those years, she was the only woman. And we know the photo of Phyllis at the Seagram. This was a very rare. I think you need to enlarge the idea of what architecture was at the time to be able to see the presence of these other women and see their agency. Yeah, probably that will be the way of discovering more.